grown as a musician. Beat the crafts, what I had to do while you sitting. So you listen and think about how dudes spitting, but dudes written's a product.
Welcome to 3CountCommentaries. Today we'll be discussing Smoke Broken Skull Sessions featuring Diamond Dallas Page. And this was a very interesting Smoke and Skull Sessions because I've heard, a lot of DDP interviews. So a lot of these stories are stories that I've heard before. But one thing that I think, and it's always a running thread throughout these episodes if you're paying attention, in this one, it was the power of networking in the wrestling business. DDP got so far in the business because of his ability to network. He's a people person. The first time he got into a situation where he really didn't have too many friends is when things went off the rails. And it was almost immediate. In doing this, this is how it became so easy to tell his story. Because the DDP story begins with him running bars and nightclubs. As he said, as a kid, he tried out wrestling. He had actually gotten trained. He wanted to be handsome Dallas Page, but he got hurt and his career got derailed. Then he moved into running bars in New Jersey, and he gave that up, started running bars in Florida. He was hosting shows, being a DJ. He was inspired by the rock and roll connection to wrestling. So the rock and wrestling connection was really his thing, and it made him rethink about wrestling. And that's when he beginning to fantasize about it. And he started, writing down these names. Like he started calling himself Diamond Dallas. Then he came up with the Diamond Exchange and the Diamond Dolls and all this kind of stuff. And because he was a DJ, he had some good vocal skills, good energy, good presentation, all that stuff. He started doing commercials for this place called Norma Jean's Cafe. He was known as The Voice. He started doing all of these interesting little commercials for them. And this opened up an opportunity for him to be on the radio. And he knew a guy who worked at a radio station. The guy wanted him. He wanted The Voice to be on radio to help him do wrestling. And DDP didn't really want to do it. He said, look, I'm never really a wrestling guy. Hey, I'm a fan, but I never really got into the business. I don't know the ins and the outs of it. And the guy ran a boxing podcast. He wanted to do a radio show. And he wanted to do a weekly wrestling thing. And he ended up getting DDP to do it by saying that Captain Lou Albano was going to be there. Now, double back. DDP is inspired by the rock and wrestling connection. He really wants to get back into the business because of that. So Captain Lou's going to be there. He shows up. DDP decides to do it. DDP meets Captain Lou Albano. Captain Lou kind of sells it to the audience as if DDP is some guy in the business and that he knows him and all that kind of stuff. So he starts getting over a little bit. He kind of knows some of the boys from the club, Teddy DiBiase and Jake Roberts and a couple of other guys who had come into the bar. He had taken pictures with them and stuff like that. So he knows people within the business. But they know him not as a guy in the business, but a guy outside the business. So after Captain Lou, it was Sergeant Slaughter, and Sergeant Slaughter came in and put him over on the radio as if he was somebody who knew anything about wrestling. And then this is when DDP dropped the bomb on me. He says, it's not who you know or who knows you. It's about who is willing to tell others that they know you. Who is willing to make a phone call and say, yeah, I know that guy. That is very important information. So he starts talking about the AWA and that there was a guy in the AWA, I didn't write his name down, who was interested in looking for wrestlers. So DDP got together with some bouncers of his. They had taken some pictures. There was an independent wrestler who DDP knew. He flew that guy in or drove him in or whatever to help him put together a tape. And he sent this tape to the AWA in 1988. The AWA was very interested. He got a phone call from Greg Gagne or somebody else from the AWA. And he said that he got a call to do a tryout. They wanted to bring the whole team in. DDP, the three bouncers, and the indie wrestler, bring all of these guys in. And DDP told him the truth. Look, I'm, not really in the business. Because the guy asked him, where did you guys work? And nobody's ever heard of you. And DDP's like, look, we didn't know what to do. We just put together a package and sent it out. these guys can't really work, but you could put me with some other guys if that's what you want to do. And they said, no, you know what? We don't, we'll call you back. And he thought that was it. Next thing you know, Greg Gagne calls him and says, look, you sent this tape. We still want to see what you can do. So they wanted to bring him in to manage some guys that they had. And he ended up managing Medusa and Bad Company. And he said he got the job in AWA because Paul Heyman quit. When Paul Heyman quit the AWA, they left a void for a manager, and he was able to fill it. So from there, he starts, in the AWA, and he's managing Medusa and Bad Company, and he's doing the promo work and all that kind of stuff. And he says he ran into Kurt Hennig because Kurt Hennig was still there. And he and Kurt Hennig they're mucking it up in the locker room. And Kurt Hennig says, I love that thing that you do. And DDP's like, I don't know what that is. What are you talking about? And then Kurt Hennig was like, good God. And then so DDP's go, good God, and does the whole spiel from the radio or whatever. And Hennig was like, I love that thing. I love that thing. And invites him to go to the bar. So the two of them go to the bar, and then Hennig lays it on him. This is where you're going to get all your relationships. Not in the ring, not backstage in the locker room, but in the clubs and in the bars after the show. That's where you're going to make real friends. That's where you're going to network in this business. And DDP never forgot that. Oddly enough, he had already been doing it. Like I said, he had met several guys already in the business through running his own bar. 1989, DDP runs into Dusty Rhodes. So because of his work in the AWA, he got a phone call from Mike Graham to do Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. He has to sell himself to Dusty, though. So everybody is really in love with the DJ style of DDP, and he's called to do this, and he has to impress Dusty over the phone. So he says he has strep throat, but he cuts his whole entire DJ thing to Dusty, who falls in love with it and asks him to come do color commentary for Florida Championship Wrestling. So he's working alongside Gordon Soley. Like, this is tremendous because they see his passion and they see his dedication and they understand he has a skill. They're not quite sure how far he can go, but they know he's got a skill and he's a personable guy. He's a nice guy. In 1990, DDP got a tryout for the WWF, and they actually showed footage of this. That fucking ruled, okay? WWF having recording everything is such a positive for their business. They simply they record everything and they keep it in vaults. There's probably all kinds of stuff in that vault. I didn't know DDP even had a tryout for the WWF in 1990. But he says that because of Dusty, because Dusty had gone to the WWF, he was called in to do color commentary. And so they have this footage of DDP doing his high energy DJ stuff with Lord Alfred Hayes. And they're messing with him during the thing because Bruce Pritchard is messing with him. And he mentions that during Paul Heyman's tryout, they made him do a thing with his ponytail, make him whip his hair around or whatever. They were just messing with him. Just like they did Eric Bischoff when they told him to sell a broom. They're trying to see if he's going to crack under pressure or whatever. So Bruce is messing with DDP during this thing. And DDP is doing his high energy commercial thing. He was actually not bad to me. He wasn't bad. I think if it was 1992 or 1993, it probably would have worked. But 1990, I don't know. But he didn't get the job. So he ends up trying to get out of the business because Florida Championship Wrestling has gone out of business. AWA has gone out of business. He's about to marry Kimberly, so he's now getting out of the bars. He wants to get back into wrestling, but now he's kind of out of the game. And this is another good thing. He kept in touch with all of the people that he knew. He would call Dusty regularly just to touch base, just to say hey, just to say what's up. Didn't ask him for anything. And then he says, I know you can't guarantee me anything, but should I be going to New York? Should I be going to Florida? Or should I be coming down to Atlanta? And Dusty told him, look, if you want to work in the business, you need to be down in Atlanta. So he moved to Atlanta. And Dusty hooks him up with a job as a manager in WCW. And this is where he got put with the Freebirds. WCW iteration of the Freebirds with Jimmy Jam Garvin and Michael Hayes. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. He was nervous about being the manager of the Freebirds, but he knew Michael Hayes already because he had worked in AWA and they had the Super Clash thing together. So I believe maybe Michael Hayes was working for WCCW or he was working in Memphis or one of the others. So the two of them had met before when DDP worked in the AWA. So they were buddies already. And this is, becoming a fun thing for him now. Hey, he's in here with the Freebirds. He's doing this thing with a friend already. Again, networking, touching base, knowing people. So he ends up getting fired as a manager by Magnum TA. Dusty didn't have the heart to fire him. The reason why he was fired was that he was overshadowing the boys. And, his personality was too large. He was very big. He was over gimmicked. He was still doing commentary, but they felt like he was taking too much from the guys that he was managing. And he said that he was warned about this from Scott Hall, who was the Diamond Stud at the time, who told him, like, look, you're taking a lot out of this. People aren't really paying attention to us. You got all of their attention because of how gaudy and how loud you are. And he says that he essentially saw that as the end of the road for him. Like, he could still do commentary, but he wanted to perform. He wanted to go out in front of the crowd. And he said, the only way I can do that now, they won't let me be a manager, is I got to wrestle. So he starts telling the Freebirds, look, I'm going to go wrestle. And they laughed at him. They said, no way. What are you going to do? You're 35. It's not going to work. But he goes to the power plant anyway. And then he says, as he's in the power plant, that's where he got his second level of training. Then he starts going and doing matches in WCW. Then Paige and Steve Austin, who are long-term friends, they've been friends for 25 years or something like that, used to be roommates, used to live together. Like, that's crazy. They told some stories early about Steve Austin being drunk in the house and leaving cookie crumbs and stuff all over the place. Like, the drunk Austin stories in this thing were numerous. So many drunk Austin stories in this. But anyway, this is where Steve Austin let it be known that DDP was ahead of the curve. He would actually camcord his matches in order to review them later. And of course, as a rib, Austin and various guys like Pillman and Raven would do color commentary over his matches. So as he would set up this tripod and record his own matches at the house shows and everything, in order for him to watch them later on VHS, those guys would be cracking jokes on them and stuff like that on the tapes. And they had to admit that footage would have been worth a lot of money if DDP wasn't so cheap and he was reusing the same tapes over and over and over again. So he didn't keep any of those tapes. He was just taping over it each time. But it was a good way for him to learn, at least what he thought, and looking back on his own matches. And then these tapes became very important later. Jake Roberts had come to WCW. If you remember, this was around the time he left the WWF and go to WCW, and he wasn't there very long. DDP had gotten injured, and Jake Roberts was kind of living out of a hotel. DDP goes to his wife and says, look, he already knew Jake from the bars in the 80s, and they had worked together a tidbit in WCW. And he knew Jake, and he says, I want to bring Jake in. I want Jake to live with us. And Kimberly, for some reason, let this happen. So Jake was living in their guest room. And DDP takes this opportunity to say, look, I'm living with, the master of psychology and pro wrestling. This is a big opportunity for me. This is a chance for me to really get some learning in. He's injured anyway. And he tells Jake, like, I can't wait to get in the ring with you and learn some stuff. And Jake says, nope, never going to get in the ring with him. You're going to learn more by sitting on your couch and me reviewing your matches than you would getting in the ring with me. So Jake says, you know all the moves you need to know. What you need to know is the when, the why, and the why. To get the big reactions and everything. And he starts doing that. And then when his injury healed and Jake was ready to go back on the road, they did some indie tours together. And he ended up back in WCW. And then I think this was maybe 95 or 96, maybe 94, where they're talking about the initial iteration of Diamond Dallas Page. And he's wearing the big fur coats, and he's got the long cigar, he's got the multiple rings, he's got the sunglasses, he got everything. And he says that, he wasn't being himself, he was being what he thought people wanted to see out of a pro wrestler on television. He wanted to be over the top. And then he was told to turn it down. Again, this is the second time he's told to turn it down. I mean, first time he was a manager. Now he's a wrestler. He says it's Bischoff that comes to him and says, look, piece by piece, take these things off. Lose the sunglasses, lose the rings, lose the coat. And the final thing was getting rid of the cigar. And DDP resisted every bit of it, but ended up thinking, okay, well, whatever. My boss is telling me to get rid of this stuff. I'm going to get rid of it. And he said he just started doing the diamond cutter sign. And his psychology of his matches would be he would get beat up the entire match and then hit the diamond cutter and win. That was essentially his match. His match was get beat up, do a move, counter a move, body slam, power bomb, whatever, into the diamond cutter and win. And he started really getting over. So he says that, it was a combination of him being himself, him coming up with the right move, and, the crowd starting to get behind him at house shows. So then they jump to 1996, 1997, where he's doing the deal with the NWO. This is a very interesting thing, too, that really is, his connections are paying off. DDP used to be the manager of both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash during their original iterations of WCW. So he gives this idea to Scott Hall about giving him the diamond cutter and refusing to join the NWO. Because he says, he's dead in the water. He doesn't know what he's going to do because, the business is changing and he's kind of getting lost in the shuffle. And Nash really liked the idea and Hall liked the idea, but neither one of them would tell Bischoff. They wanted him to tell Bischoff. He didn't want to talk to Bischoff about this. But, Nash ended up giving the idea to Bischoff and they ended up going with it. And DDP, of course, hits the diamond cutter on Hall, does his slick thing with Nash. He goes over the top rope. DDP looks like, tremendous, to the audience. Everybody's super excited. And he says this, crowd reaction is what got him on Randy Savage's radar. And since nobody told Randy who he was going to work with, Randy chose to work with him. And of course, everybody's heard this story before about how, Randy Savage willingly put him over. And at Spring Stampede in April of 97. And he says that he thanked him on a Thanksgiving phone call. He called Randy to thank him. And he tells this whole dramatic scene that was very Randy Savage about, Randy cornering him after he called Randy to thank him for Thanksgiving. He left a voicemail because Randy didn't answer the phone. And Randy giving him this intense behind closed doors statement about how he called his dad and asked his dad if he ever got a thank you from any one of the boys who he put over. And his dad said no. And Randy said, that meant a lot to me, and gave him a hug. And they became friends. And it's like DDP is like the master of relationships. And it goes to the next level because this is where we get into Karl Malone. Because he says that he was at an autograph signing where he met a guy networking. And the guy told him, hey, I got tickets to the Houston Rockets Utah Jazz game. DDP goes to the game. Karl Malone is there, sees him. They throw up the diamond cutter sign at each other. And then they meet after the game. And this is where, DDP kind of runs the idea of bringing Karl Malone in to do something in WCW. Because he knows that Dennis Rodman is about to come in. Now, he doesn't know that, they're about to play in the NBA Finals. Nobody knows that. But he knows that it's a cool angle for him to run. And so he decides to sort of pitch the idea to Karl Malone. Once Karl Malone is interested in that, he pitches the idea to Bischoff. And they run the Tonight Show angle, which leads DDP and Karl Malone, of course, against Hogan and Rodman. So that's very cool. Then he talks about, 1998, his match with Goldberg. They showed a lot of clips from this match about him putting the match together. They also talked about this during the Savage thing, how he was meticulous in putting the matches together. And he said he put this match together with Goldberg months, well, I think about a month before it actually happened. And because he headbutted with Goldberg quite a bit on some things. He wanted Goldberg to miss a spear. Goldberg didn't want to miss the spear because that's his spot, that's his thing. He didn't want to look silly. But he said the ironic thing about this is, 8 years prior to this match, he was driving the pink Cadillac to WrestleMania 6. Warrior and Hogan was the main event. And he says 8 years later, Hogan and Warrior are on the undercard of a match that I'm the main event of. Because he closed Halloween Havoc 98. Interesting thing though, Hogan and Warrior went over, and that's why the pay-per-view thing was cut at the time. And 99, of course, he wins his world title, pinning Flair, and he told Flair how much he appreciated it and all that kind of stuff. But then we get to the WWF, because this is where the positivity and the networking of Diamond Dallas Page hits a wall. He said he didn't know how much heat guys from WCW had until he got there. He didn't think it was that personal until he got there. And he talked about how he's originally from the New York, New Jersey area. He was always a fan of the WWF and always a mark for that territory. And that he was warned by Kevin Nash and Dusty not to go. That, let it die down, collect the free money, don't go. Let's all go in together, but he thought, I'm 45. If I'm going to do it, I got to do it now. So he jumps in, and then they present him with the stalker angle. And he says that he believes that this stalker angle is 100% because WCW guys had so much heat in WWF. And he said he wanted to be a team player and that he should have been himself. And if he was being himself, he would have refused the angle and would have quit and went home. But because he wanted to be a team player, he didn't want to show that he was a prima donna. He wanted to be a nice guy. He did it. And he said he felt like it didn't do anything for him. And it beat him down, and creatively didn't make him feel too good. By the time he started doing the Positively Page thing, he was 46. And he said he realized it was time to go. But he still liked working with Christian and loved working those matches because at that time, Christian was very young and he was very old. And he felt like it wasn't too much of a difference between the two of them. And he says the only regrets he really had is he didn't stick around to work with Austin or Rock or Shawn Michaels, and that he just didn't find his place in the WWF. And I think it was because it was the first time he really didn't have high-level friends. I mean, he did in terms of, Michael Hayes was there, but I don't think Michael Hayes had the power then that he does now, I don't think Bischoff was there yet either, and Buzz Bischoff was just an employee. But DDP was friends with everybody in WCW. That's why it made sense for him to be there. He was Bischoff's friend. He had made friends with Savage. He had made friends with Hall and Nash. He had made friends with some guys who were in high levels and high-level positions. Dusty in WCW. That stuff didn't translate to the WWF. So it makes sense when you look at it. If, DDP's strength was in his networking ability, that the first time he really got into the position where that network was kind of snapped, it didn't really go well for him. So it makes perfect sense to me. Of course, he talked about his Hall of Fame induction. He said that Dusty told him that the only two things are real in this business: the first world title and the Hall of Fame. And he says to him, those things are real. But he will put both of them secondary to the resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts, because Jake the Snake Roberts helped him so much. And he said there will be no Diamond Dallas Page if it wasn't for Jake the Snake Roberts and one for Dusty. Those two guys gave him so much. And he says that, the third person he felt really did him a favor was Eric Bischoff, because Eric Bischoff protected him from a lot of the backstabbers in WCW. And he said that, Bischoff told him to quit being so honest and stop trying to help everybody. And DDP said, I'm gonna do me. I'm gonna keep doing me, I'm gonna do what I can to help, and I'm gonna tell him like it is. And Him and Steve cheered on that, and that was pretty much the end. The only thing after that was that him and Jake the Snake Roberts are going to start a podcast called the DDP Snake Pit. They're going to be doing it with Conrad Thompson. That ought to be thrilling. I'm pretty sure they're going to go through some old WCW stuff. Probably going to go through the Stalker stuff, because that's going to be the biggest stuff to talk about, I guess. Those episodes are going to soar through the roof to get how we got to the Stalker angle, and it made no sense, and it was dumb. But that was a completely different time, and even though it was a different time, I still don't see why he had to go through that. But as a person who's an introvert, me, I don't really like talking to strangers or spending a lot of time talking to people, but it's undeniable the power of connections. And DDP is one of the guys that, for a guy to get into business at 35, he had to know somebody. To even get a look at that age, you have to be willing for somebody to get an opportunity to you at 35 years old, and then for you to be a manager at first and then transition into a wrestler and still be taken seriously. It's interesting stuff, man. It's a very unique journey. And nobody's ever done it like DDP. I can't really think of anybody else who started as a manager and became a wrestler, and was successful and became world champion. Usually it's the other way around. Usually a guy is a wrestler and he gets hurt and he becomes a manager. This guy got fired for being a manager because he was bigger than some of the guys he was managing, more charismatic than some of the guys he was managing, and he had to be tamed, and they got rid of him. So it's a very interesting story, and DDP's story is very unique. I know a lot of people probably didn't watch this episode because, again, DDP has told these stories in bits and pieces all over the place. But when you hear it all together and you see how, DDP made friends and kept in contact with people and was a people person and somebody that everybody liked and knew, and that's really what helped him. And that's very special, because he's still doing it today. He still reaches out and helps guys. He still calls people, And DDP is basically a saint right now. Saved the life of Jake Roberts. Tried to save Scott Hall. Who knows? He might even relapse by now. But it was a tremendous episode. I had fun with it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session. But you got an affection for no progression, regression.